My name is Nora Brandt, and I'm 33 years old. I was standing on my grandfather's loading dock with a machinist's tool chest he'd built me when I was 9, and the side door of the shop was already chained. My parents had run a padlock through the latch before the dirt on his grave had settled. They thought they'd taken everything: the building, the land, the bank accounts, and the one thing that actually mattered, the patents. 60 years of a man's ideas, every drawing he ever pressed into a page. They didn't know about the $20 million in licensing royalties he'd locked into an irrevocable trust with my name on it, and I'm glad I kept that quiet. Because what happened 9 days later changed everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. But here's what none of them understood. My grandfather had been building one last thing in the months before he died, and he hadn't built it for the company or for them. He'd built it for me. Welcome back to Suspense Com Stories. This is the place where family truths come to light one page at a time. If you've ever been treated like the hired help in your own family, type measure twice in the comments so I know you're here, and hit subscribe. These stories go up quietly, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Now let me take you back to where it started. Walter Brandt built Brandt Tool Works out of a rented garage off Kishwaukee Street in Rockford, Illinois, with 2 used lathes and a hand that was already missing the top of one finger. He was 23. By the time he was 40, half the punch presses and brake presses running in the factories along the Rock River had a Brandt safety clutch bolted to them. A little gray mechanism he invented that slammed a machine to a dead stop in the time it takes to blink, before a hand could follow a piece of steel into the dies. He called it the dead stop. He held the patent on it, and then the patents on the 11 things that made it better over the next 30 years. He licensed it to every machine builder who'd pay, and a lot of them paid, because the alternative was a workers' comp claim shaped like somebody's wrist. Grandpa never put it in those words. He just said, "A machine should be more afraid of your hand than you are of it." I grew up in that shop. From the summer I turned 12, I sat at the drafting table in the back, sharpening pencils for him, and later reading his patent files. Other kids had lemonade stands. I had a grandfather who taught me that an idea is worth exactly nothing until you can prove on paper, dated and witnessed, that it came out of your head first. He taught me to read a patent, claim the way he taught me to read calipers, slowly, twice, because the difference between mine and not mine could live in a single word. That's why I do what I do. I'm a registered patent agent. I'm not a lawyer, I don't argue cases. I do something narrower and, on a day like the one I'm about to tell you about, sharper. I prove who really invented something. I read the notebooks and the filings and the assignment records, and I can tell you whose hand made a thing and whose name just got typed onto it later. Grandpa is the reason I sat for that exam. He used to say it like a joke. Finally, somebody in this family who can tell the thieves from the makers. He didn't know how literal that would get. When the Parkinsons came, it came fast and late, the kind that's already halfway up the stairs by the time anyone says the word. I was the one who drove to his house on Auburn Street every morning. I cut his food into pieces he could manage. I read him the Rockford paper. I sat at his kitchen table and renewed his patent maintenance fees and reconciled his royalty statements while he dozed in the recliner with the radio on. 3 years I did that. My parents were busy. That's the word they used. Busy. My father, Glenn, came on Sundays sometimes and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. Both of them, even the one that was short 2 fingers from an accident in the shop when he was a teenager. He never came past the doorway. My mother, Marlene, didn't come at all. She had her reasons. I just didn't understand them yet. The day before he died, Grandpa pressed a 6-inch brass caliper into my hand. The good one, the one worn gold smooth at the thumb wheel. "Keep me honest, kiddo," he said. "I've carried it in my jacket pocket every day since. I had it on me for all of this. I have it on me now." The funeral was at Second Congregational, and the place was full old toolmakers, retired die setters, a man who'd run a press for 40 years and still had all 10 fingers because of my grandfather and knew it. I sat in the 4th row. My mother arranged the seating. She stood at the front in a black dress and accepted condolences like she'd earned them, telling Mrs. Ackhaffer from 2 doors down that Walter would have wanted us to be strong for each other. My father stood beside her, gray-faced, staring at the carpet like a man waiting to be sentenced. My cousin Dean drove in from the suburbs in a leased SUV and a new suit and worked the room like it was a trade show, shaking hands, leaving cards. which is essentially what he does. Dean calls himself a technology transfer consultant. He brokers other people's inventions to the highest bidder and takes a cut. I'd never once seen him in the shop. Nobody asked me to speak. I'd spent 3 years at that man's bedside, and nobody thought to hand me the microphone. In the church basement, over the coffee urn and the ham sandwiches, I heard my mother talking to Mrs. Aucaffer. She didn't lower her voice. She never thinks she has to. Walter just felt sorry for her, she said. That's the only reason Nora was ever out there. The poor thing's got nothing else going on. She's just the shop girl. The shop girl. I was standing close enough to hear the ice settle in her glass. I didn't react. I put my hand around the caliper in my pocket and squeezed until the jaws left a line in my palm. Dean found me by the coat rack 10 minutes later and put a hand on my shoulder like we were close. Listen, cuz, the family's got plans for the building. You should clear your stuff out of the back room before the appraiser comes. 2 days after the funeral, I drove out to the shop to get my things. The side door, the one that hadn't latched right since the Clinton administration, was wrapped in a chain and a padlock so new the brass still had the sticker on it. My mother was standing on the loading dock with a cardboard box at her feet. I packed what's yours, she said, with the smile people give you when they're handing you a parking ticket. The box held a few changes of clothes, 2 of my own reference binders, and the machinist's tool chest Grandpa had made me when I was 9, quarter-sawn oak, dovetailed corners he'd cut by hand, my initials stamped into the brass plate on the lid. N.J.B. Inside it, I'd always kept pencils, an old protractor, a photo of the 2 of us at the Boone County Fair standing next to a tractor that wasn't ours. The works is part of the estate now, my mother said. Your father and I are handling everything. It's what Walter would have wanted. Behind the screen, my father stood holding a travel mug. His good hand was shaking, not from grief, from something else. I'd understand it later. He wouldn't look at me. Across the lot, Ruth Veasley was getting out of her car. Ruth ran the front office of Brandt Tool Works for 41 years. She'd come to leave flowers on the dock, I think. She stopped when she saw the chain and the box and my mother's face, and she just stood there with the flowers hanging at her side, watching. She didn't wave, but she saw everything. Ruth always did. I picked up the box, tucked the tool chest under my arm, and said, I'll be back for the rest of my things. My mother tilted her head. There is no rest, Nora. I drove the 20 minutes back to my apartment in Loves Park, a 1-bedroom over a hardware store on Riverside, 600 square feet that smelled faintly of cut keys and fertilizer. The tool chest rode on the passenger seat the whole way. When I parked, my phone showed 1 missed call from a Chicago number. No voicemail. I didn't call back. Grandpa had told me to wait. 6 months before he died, on one of his clear days, Grandpa called me into the workshop attached to his garage. He was in the chair by then, his hands curled in his lap, but his eyes were the same, sharp, patient, taking a measurement off your face. Don't write this down, he said. Don't tell your father, don't tell anyone. He told me about the trust. He'd set it up 15 years earlier with a lawyer in Chicago named Francis Whitaker. He'd put the patents in it, and the license agreements, and the royalty stream that came off them, by then around $20 million and still flowing every quarter as long as the licensees kept paying. I was the sole beneficiary. My mouth went dry. The man wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation and drove a truck with 250,000 miles on it, and he'd quietly built $20 million and told no one. That's my whole life's work, he said, and I'm leaving it to the one person who can tell what it's worth and where it came from. I tried to argue. He lifted one shaking hand to stop me. Frances will call you after I'm gone. She'll tell you the rest. Until then, you don't breathe a word, not to Glenn, not to your mother, not to that nephew of hers. He looked at the tool chest sitting on the shelf where it had lived since I was a kid. And when the time comes, he said, look in the bottom of your chest. I built it with a little extra room. The rest of what? I asked. He just looked tired then. You'll understand when it's time. Back in my apartment, 2 days after they padlocked me out, I sat on the bed and looked at that tool chest and didn't open the bottom. Not yet. I knew the trust was real. I knew irrevocable meant no probate judge and no scheming relative could touch it. But I didn't understand what the rest was, and Grandpa had told me to wait for Francis. So I waited. The brass caliper sat on the nightstand. I cleaned it with a rag I didn't need to use. My mother moved fast. 3 days after the funeral, she filed a petition in Winnebago County claiming that Grandpa had died effectively without a will, that any estate documents had been lost or never executed. She signed a sworn affidavit stating that to her knowledge, no trust or supplementary estate instruments existed. My father co-signed. I saw his signature later in the court file. The G in Glenn trailed off the edge of the line like it was trying to leave. Dean was already working the real angle, the only angle he ever works. I'd learn later, from the assignment records, that 2 months before the funeral, somebody had recorded a patent assignment transferring Grandpa's entire portfolio out of his name and into a shell company called Keystone IP Holdings, LLC. Marlene Brandt, sole member. And somebody had sent every one of Grandpa's licensees a 1-page notice of updated remittance instructions, redirecting the quarterly royalties to a Keystone account. I found out about the court filing from Ruth Veasley. She called me on a Thursday evening, careful as a woman stepping onto ice. "Honey, I was at the courthouse paying my property taxes, and I saw your mother filing papers at the clerk's window. I thought you'd want to know." I thanked her, hung up, and pressed my palms flat on the kitchen table. The part of me that does this for a living understood exactly what was happening. Every day my mother moved forward was a day a patent or a license slipped further into a name that wasn't supposed to have it. I could have called a lawyer that night. I could have filed something. But Grandpa had said, "Wait for Francis." So I sat with it. 5 days of watching the clock and trusting a dead man's instinct over my own. On the 6th day, my phone rang. Chicago number. This time someone was there. But before I tell you about that call, I need to take you back about a year to a thing I saw and let go. A year before he died, Grandpa was still mostly himself, and I was at his kitchen table doing what I always did the first Saturday of the month, going through his accounts. 2 charges caught my eye. $8,000, then 6, both labeled patent annuity service fee. My mother was at the counter, going through his mail like she lived there. I asked her about them. She didn't even pause. The maintenance fees on the patents. There's a service that handles the deadlines now, so your grandfather doesn't miss one. It has a processing charge. She said it the way you'd explain the weather. It tracked. Patent maintenance fees are real. You pay the patent office at 3.5 years, 7.5, 11.5, or the patent dies. Plenty of people hire a service to babysit those dates. The invoice she showed me had a real-looking letterhead and a docket number. I let it go. A year later, alone in my apartment with 3 years of Grandpa's records on my laptop and nothing left to lose, I looked again. I sorted by description and filtered for the word annuity. 14 charges over 18 months. 8,000 here, 6 there, 9,200, 5,500 amounts that wobbled just enough to look organic. The total was $141,000. No annuity service on earth bills you 14 times in 18 months for patents that come due once every 4 years. She hadn't lied to me once. She'd built a system. I pulled the authorizations for each charge. Every one carried my father's signature. Clean, steady, nothing like the tremor in the hand that had shaken holding a travel mug on the loading dock. The same hand that couldn't hold a coffee cup at the funeral had signed 6 figures of transfers without a wobble. My phone rang. Chicago. I picked up before the second ring. Francis Whitaker's voice was the calm you only get from 40 years of delivering bad news in good offices. "Nora, I'm sorry for the delay. Your grandfather instructed me not to contact you until 9 days after his passing. He was very specific about the number. I have documents he prepared for you. We need to meet in person. Can you come to Chicago tomorrow? Is this about the trust?" "The trust is the easy part," she said. "There's more, and Nora, when you come, bring the tool chest he made you. He was very specific about that, too." I wrote her address on the back of a hardware store receipt because my hands needed a job. Then I told her. My mother filed a petition. She's claiming he died without a will. There's an assignment recorded against his patents to a holding company. The royalties are being rerouted. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that tells you the person already knew. "We'll talk about all of it tomorrow," she said. I drove to Chicago the next morning before the sun was up. 90 miles of I-90 with the tool chest belted into the passenger seat like a kid. The whole way I thought about every number I'd ever flagged at that kitchen table and then talked myself out of. Grandpa used to stand at the drafting table with graphite on his knuckles and tell me, "People will tell you what they want to be true, Nora. Steel only tells you what is." I'd spent a year believing my mother instead of the spreadsheet. If you've ever had that quiet feeling about someone in your own family, the one that says a number doesn't sit right, a story doesn't add up, and you talked yourself out of it because they were family, stay with me. Because what Francis showed me that morning proved that the record always remembers, even when people work very hard to forget. If you know that feeling, type "the record knows" in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. Frances Whitaker's office was on the 11th floor of a building on La Salle Street, the kind with quiet carpet and a view of the river. She was about 65, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a chain and hands that moved with no wasted motion when she opened the first folder. "Your grandfather hired me 15 years ago to set up and manage the trust," she said. "But 2 years before he died, he asked me to do something unusual. He asked me to hire a forensic accountant quietly, a man named Owen Schmidt. He suspected someone was bleeding the estate, and he wanted it documented while he could still understand it." She slid Owen's report across the desk. 60-some pages, tabbed and bound. I opened it, and the part of my brain that does this for a living took the wheel before the rest of me caught up. Over 28 months, my mother had moved $340,000 out of Grandpa's personal accounts into 3 places, one in her name, one in my father's, and one inside Keystone IP Holdings LLC, with her listed as sole member. The fake annuity fees were just the surface. There were valuation consulting fees, portfolio management retainers, and a recurring charge labeled licensing administration that went to a P.O. box registered to Dean's office. She'd broken the transfers into amounts just under $10,000, $8,900 here, $9,700 there, to slide under the reporting line the banks have to file on. Owen had a word for it: structuring. I had a word for it too: architecture. "Your grandfather couldn't stop her in court," Frances said. "By the time Owen finished, the Parkinsons had taken his ability to sign or to testify reliably. He couldn't fight her himself." She set her hands flat on the desk, so he prepared someone who could. Then she slid the second folder across. It was thinner, 6 pages, and what was inside it was not about money at all. "There's a part of this you don't know," Frances said, "and your grandfather didn't want you to find it the way I'm about to tell you, but he was equally clear that you had to know it before you walked into a courtroom, because they will use it, and you can't be surprised." She let me read while she talked. "When your father was 17, there was an accident at the shop. The story everyone in Rockford knows is that a press failed and a young man named Danny Cole lost his right hand. Danny was your father's best friend. The story is that it was equipment failure, that your grandfather felt so responsible he spent the next 10 years inventing the dead stop so it could never happen again." I knew that story. Everyone knew that story. It was practically the company's founding myth. The tragedy that turned Walter Brandt into the man who saved 1,000 other hands. "It wasn't equipment failure," Frances said quietly. "Your father set that machine up. He took the guard off to clear a jam and he didn't put it back, and he let Danny run it. Your grandfather walked in 30 seconds too late, and then he made a decision. He told the insurer and the lawyers and the whole town that the press had malfunctioned. He took the blame, the lawsuit, the premiums, all of it, onto himself and the company, so that his 17-year-old son would not spend his life as the boy who took his best friend's hand." The room was very quiet. 11 floors down, the river kept moving. Your grandfather never told Danny the truth. He paid for Danny's settlement, partly out of his own pocket, routed so it looked like the company. And then he built the dead stop. Every dollar of that $20 million, Nora, grew out of the worst day of your father's life and the lie your grandfather told to protect him. I thought of my father standing in the doorway, both hands in his pockets. "And my mother knows." Frances nodded. "She found out early in the marriage. Glenn told her himself people do, when they're young and in love and think confession buys safety. She's held it over him for 30 years. Every time he hesitated to sign something she put in front of him, she reminded him that one phone call to Danny Cole, to the paper, to the town, and the founding myth comes apart, and Glenn Brandt becomes the man who maimed his best friend and let his own father take the fall. He signed whatever she asked. He was terrified of being the only thing he'd ever truly been afraid of being. I set the folder down. My father wasn't the architect. He was the lock she kept the key to. And my grandfather had spent the back half of his life turning his son's worst moment into the thing that saved strangers and had never once held it against him. He just quietly built and built and built and let the world call it grief instead of grace. "There's one more thing," Frances said. "Did Walter give you a tool chest?" "Oak made it himself. About so big." She held her hands apart at exactly its dimensions. I nodded. "Check the bottom," she said. "He told me there's room he built in. He wouldn't tell me what's in it. He said it was yours to find." I drove back to Love's Park with 2 folders on the passenger seat and the tool chest balanced on top of them. My apartment was full of late afternoon light, the kind that makes dust look like it's deciding whether to fall. I set the chest on the bed, took out the pencils and the protractor and the fair photo, me and Grandpa, 2007, grinning next to that tractor, and I ran my fingers along the bottom panel. Oak, sanded smooth as skin. Then I found the seam, a hairline along the back edge that didn't follow the grain. I pressed, and the panel shifted, and underneath it was maybe an inch of hidden space. The smell came up first. Cutting oil and cedar shavings, not stale, like he'd packed it last week and sealed it in. 3 things were in there. A bound notebook, black canvas cover gone soft at the corners, the kind machinists have used for 100 years. His lab notebook, the original, the one I'd seen on his bench my whole life and never been allowed to take home. A small brass key, unmarked, the kind that fits a safe deposit box. And a sealed envelope, heavy cream paper, the flap closed with a circle of red wax he only ever used when he was being formal, which was almost never. I broke the wax. One sheet, his blocky capital letters, the handwriting of a man who'd filled out work orders his whole life. Rock River Savings, Main Branch, Box 0931, the key fits. WB. 4 lines, no explanation. Just instructions from a man who measured twice and never wasted a word. I held the key up to the light. It was warm from being inside the oak, the way the caliper used to be warm from being inside his pocket. Grandpa spent his whole life building things that outlasted him. Even gone, he was still building. 1 layer at a time, exactly like he taught me. My mother didn't slow down. While I was in Chicago and back, she filed a motion in Winnebago County asking the court to freeze all known estate assets and to recognize Keystone IP Holdings as the lawful owner of the patent portfolio. Dean filed a sworn affidavit in support. As a licensed technology transfer professional and a member of the family, I can confirm the assignment reflects Harold. He'd actually typed Walter wrong once and corrected it. Walter Brandt's expressed intentions. Licensed, professional, family, he managed to be wrong about all 3. The summons came to my apartment by certified mail on a Friday. 30 days to respond or forfeit my right to contest. I called Frances. "They're moving fast," I said. "They have to," she said. "The trust is irrevocable. The minute a judge sees it, their probate claim collapses, and the assignment they recorded is forged. Once that's proven, the whole thing unwinds. They're racing to relicense the portfolio and cash a few quarters of royalties before anyone looks closely." "Then we look first," I said. Frances connected me with Paula Hartman, an estate litigation attorney in Rockford who specialized in fiduciary breach and contested probate. Paula was in her 50s, silver bob, glasses on a chain like Frances, the kind of woman with a legal pad always within reach. We met at her office that Monday. I brought all of it, Owen Schmidt's report, the 6-page folder, Grandpa's note, the notebook, and the brass key I hadn't used yet. She read Owen's report in 20 minutes and took off her glasses. "This isn't an inheritance dispute," she said. "This is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, plus forgery, plus a fraudulent filing with a federal agency. The probate fight is almost the small part." She nodded at the key in my palm. "And that? I don't know yet." She picked up her phone. "Then let's go find out." I went to Rock River Savings on a Tuesday morning with the brass key and my driver's license. The teller walked me back to the vault. Box 0931. The key fit clean, no resistance, no drama. The way a thing fits when the man who made the lock and the man who cut the key were the same man. Inside was a thick manila envelope, and on the metal floor of the box, a thin scatter of cedar shavings. He'd put them there on purpose. He'd put them everywhere on purpose. The envelope held 3 things. First, a certified copy of an assignment, the real one recorded with the patent office 15 years earlier, transferring the entire Brandt portfolio into the trust, with me as beneficiary. Dated, notarized, properly recorded. It predated my mother's forged Keystone assignment by a decade and a half. Her assignment hadn't moved the patents out of his name. The patents had already left his name 15 years before she ever touched a pen. She'd forged a transfer of something he no longer owned. Second, the witnessed copies of the notebook pages. I'll come back to those because they are the whole story. Third, 4 pages in his blocky capitals. His letter. I sat down in the little viewing room, closed the door, and read it. He wrote about Danny, about the guard left off and the 30 seconds, about the choice he made in the next 30 seconds to carry it himself so a 17-year-old wouldn't have to. I decided in the hospital hallway what kind of man I was going to be. He wrote, I have never been sure I decided right, but I decided. And then I spent 40 years trying to deserve it. He wrote about my mother, about watching her learn his son's secret and turn it into a leash, about the Parkinsons stealing his hands a finger at a time while she moved his money $1 under 10,000 at a time. I could have stopped her sooner, he wrote. I was afraid that if I dragged it into the light, your father would have to choose in public between his wife and the version of himself he could live with. So I chose for him. I chose to protect you instead, where she couldn't reach. And then the line I carry now, the way I carry the caliper. Anybody can put their name on a thing. The only honest measure of a person is what they keep building when nobody is paying them to. I built the dead stop for nothing in a cold garage out of the worst night of my life. I built this trust for you the same way. Use it to keep the record straight, not for revenge, for the truth. The truth is the only thing they can't out-talk. His last instruction was 1 line, use what's in the notebook. They don't know IT exists. I folded the letter. At the bottom of the box, the shavings caught the fluorescent light and smelled like every summer of my childhood. I sat there 40 minutes. Then I drove home and got to work. Here is what was in the notebook and why it ended everything. In his last 2 years, even with the tremor, Grandpa had kept inventing. The dead stop's core patents were old. Some of them were within a couple of years of expiring, which is the same as saying the royalty river was about to start drying up. So he'd been working on the next thing, an auto-reset version of the dead stop. A clutch that not only stopped the machine before a hand reached the dies, but reset itself safely and logged the event, so a shop could prove its machines were tripping correctly and a worker couldn't be blamed for user error. A whole new patent, a whole new 30 years of licensing. The one last thing he was building. And here is what my mother and Dean had done, the part that turned my stomach worse than the stolen money. 2 months before he died, they had filed a brand new patent application for that exact auto-reset mechanism, naming Dean and my mother as the inventors. They were going to let the old patents expire, sit on the new one, and own the next 30 years of the dead stop outright, under their own names, as if they'd thought of it. They weren't just stealing his money. They were trying to erase him from his own last idea and carve their names into it. But an inventor's notebook is a bound book with numbered pages. You date every entry, and every so often you have someone who understands the work read it and sign at the bottom, read and understood with a date. It is the oldest, dumbest, most unbeatable habit in engineering, and Grandpa had done it religiously for 60 years. The auto-reset mechanism was in his notebook. Sketches, the spring math in his shaking hand, 3 full pages, dated 14 months before Dean and my mother filed their application. And at the bottom of each of those pages, in a steady, careful hand, a witness signature and a date. Read and understood. Ruth Veasley. Ruth had been signing his notebook pages for 41 years. She'd witnessed the auto-reset before my cousin had ever heard the word. You cannot type your name onto a thing that a bound, dated, witnessed page says somebody else made first. That's not an opinion. That's the whole reason the habit exists. I sat at my kitchen table and laid it all out the way I lay out a patent file. The real assignment, the forged assignment, the notebook pages, the witness dates, Owen's money trail, the fraudulent application with my mother's and Dean's names where my grandfather's should have been. I worked 6 days. Coffee at 2 in the morning, paper on every surface. I mapped every dollar and every claim from where it started to where they tried to send it. Paula called on the 6th night. Can you tie their application to his notebook, page by page, date by date? It's already done, I said. Then it's not a case anymore, she said. It's an audit with a gavel. The forged assignment was the cleanest thing to break because forgery leaves a body. I pulled the recorded Keystone assignment off the Patent Office's public assignment database. It's free, anyone can search it, and the signature on it was Walter Brandt's, smooth and flowing. Then I pulled his neurologist's notes from the same month, which Francis had every right to obtain. Patient exhibits marked resting and intention tremor, bilateral. Fine motor tasks, including signing his name, are no longer reliably achievable. A man who couldn't sign a birthday card had apparently executed a flawless patent assignment. Paula brought in Dr. Helen Prout, a forensic document examiner certified by the American Board. Her report took 2 weeks. The question signature is inconsistent with authenticated exemplars of Walter Brandt's signature from the corresponding period. The tremor characteristics present in all genuine late-period samples are entirely absent from the question document. In my opinion, the question signature was not produced by Walter Brandt, and the notarization had a name on it. The Keystone assignment had been notarized by a man named Kurt Lang. I looked Kurt Lang up. He worked at Dean's office. 3 people, 3 jobs. My mother drew the plans. Dean ran the crew. And my father just kept signing wherever she pointed, because she was holding the only thing he was ever truly afraid of. I drove to Rockford on a Saturday. Not to the house. I had no reason to go there. I went to the Works, the old shop off Kishwaukee, where his name was still painted over the door in letters he'd stenciled himself. The building was supposed to be empty, chained shut, but my father's truck was in the gravel lot, and the side door, had never really latched. He was sitting at the old steel desk in the office, under a wall of crew photos, young men in safety glasses grinning in front of machines my grandfather built. There was a beer on the desk. He looked up when I came in and didn't ask how I'd gotten past the lock. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not angry, just spent. "I know about the assignment, Dad, the notebook, all of it." I stayed by the door. "I'm not asking you to turn on her. I'm asking you one thing. Did you know what you were signing?" He peeled the label off the beer with his thumbnail, the good hand, the one with all its fingers. "I signed what she put in front of me," he said. "I didn't read most of it." A pause. "I didn't know it was the new one, the auto reset. I didn't know they put their names on it until it was done." His voice dropped on the last part, and I heard it the way you hear a man read only the lines of a script he rehearsed. "And Danny?" I asked. "Did you know Grandpa knew?" "Don't," he said. One word, flat as a stamped part. I looked at the photos on the wall. A man in every one of them had built things with his own hands, alongside his father. The man at the desk had spent 30 years letting somebody else take them apart, because the alternative was looking one old friend in the eye. I left. The numbers would say what he couldn't. I stood in that lot for a minute before I got in my car, looking at his name over the door. And I understood that the fraud was never really about $20 million. It was about erasing him, taking his name off his last idea and putting theirs on it, the way you'd grind a serial number off a stolen tool. If you've ever watched someone's whole life's work get quietly claimed by the people who should have protected it, you understand exactly why I couldn't let it go. If that's you, comment Steele remembers. And if you know someone who needs to hear this one, send it to them. Paula's office had a whiteboard, and by the time we were done, it looked like the wall in a detective show. Red lines from accounts to the shell company. Blue lines from the forged assignment to the relicensing. Green lines along a timeline. "Here's how it goes," Paula said. "Step 1, we present the trust and the real assignment, the recorded one from 15 years ago. That removes the patents and the $20 million from the estate entirely. There's nothing for their probate petition to be about. Step 2, we void the Keystone assignment, forged signature, fraudulent notarization, the neurologist's letter. Step 3, the notebook, we move to correct inventorship on their auto-reset application and we put it in front of the judge as evidence of fraud. They didn't invent it. They documented in a federal filing under oath that they did. Step 4, we hand the criminal pieces to the state's attorney. She tapped the 6-page folder, the one about Danny. And this? That stays in my pocket unless they force it, I said. It doesn't prove who owns a patent. I'm not using my father's worst day to win. Paula looked at me for a moment. You understand they will use it on you. They'll argue you manipulated a sick old man, isolated him, turned him against his own son. And the second they put your father on the stand as the wronged true heir, the reason he signs whatever she says becomes fair game, you may not get to keep it in your pocket. Then they'll be the ones who took it out, I said. My mother came to my apartment on a Wednesday. No call. Just her sedan in the lot beside the hardware store and Dean in the passenger seat with the engine running. I opened the door. She had her lipstick on and her concerned face, the maternal one, the one she wore for neighbors and notaries. Honey, I know this has been hard on everyone, but your father and I think it's best if we handle Walter's affairs together, as a family, before strangers pick the bones. Frances Whitaker is handling Grandpa's affairs, I said. Her face changed. The name hit her like a cold draft under a door. She got it back in about 2 seconds, which was, honestly, impressive. Frances retired years ago. She didn't. She tried another angle, the soft tilt of the head. Your grandfather wouldn't want lawyers tearing this family apart, Nora. He always said family comes first. Grandpa is the one who hired the lawyer, I said, 15 years ago, and the forensic accountant, and he kept his notebook witness the whole time. He didn't trust you a long time before I did. The concerned face slipped, and underneath it was something hard and bright, like the edge of a freshly ground tool catching the light. You don't know what you're starting. I know exactly what I'm starting, I said. I do it for a living. She left. From the window, I watched her get in the car. Dean leaned over to say something, and she shook her head once, and as they pulled out, he was already on his phone. I turned back to my kitchen table, Owen's report, Dr. Pruitt's analysis, the notebook in its evidence sleeve, the real assignment, and a letter from a dead man who'd built things and kept his promises. 3 days later, I had a court date. The pretrial conference was in Winnebago County. Judge Carmen Ruiz presiding. 50s, no nonsense, the kind of judge who's read every page before she sits down. Their lawyer was a man named Gerald Pike, local, aggressive, known for estate challenges. He filed a motion to dismiss, arguing the trust was the product of undue influence, that I, the granddaughter with unrestricted access to a sick, dependent man, had manipulated my grandfather into rewriting his legacy. I read that motion at my kitchen table. Undue influence, by the granddaughter who cut his food and renewed his maintenance fees while his son's wife forged his signature onto a federal filing. He's reaching, Paula said. The trust is 15 years old, executed when Walter was running a company and could swing a hammer. There's a physician's competency letter attached to every amendment. Let him reach. At the conference, Pike argued for limiting discovery to the bank accounts. Judge Ruiz looked at him over her glasses and ordered the opposite. Full mutual accounting from both sides of every estate asset accessed, transferred, or managed in the prior 3 years. And, when Paula raised it, the production of the Keystone assignment and the auto-reset application file. She set the evidentiary hearing for a date in October. My mother's face when the judge ordered mutual accounting was the first crack I saw. Small, a tightening at the jaw, the face of someone whose books had just been called for audit. I learned what happened next from depositions and filings. Dean called my mother the night of the conference. They're going to pull the assignment record and the application file, he said. My name is on that application as an inventor. Kurt's name is on the notary block. This isn't a family squabble anymore, Marlene. This is the patent office and a forgery charge. Hold your nerve, she told him. We say Walter authorized everything verbally. Verbal authorization from a man who couldn't sign his name. And what about the auto-reset? You want to stand up and tell a judge you invented it. You don't know which end of it bolts down. Kurt Lang, the notary, made a different call. Not to Dean, to a criminal defense attorney. Within 48 hours, Kurt's lawyer contacted Paula offering what they call cooperation. Kurt would swear that Dean had handed him the assignment and asked him to notarize it without Walter present, that he'd been told Walter had signed it earlier at home and never verified. In exchange, he wanted the state's attorney to know he'd helped. He's flipping, Paula told me. Their own notary is going to testify the signature was a forgery he stamped. And one more thing happened that I only heard about later from my father on a night he couldn't keep it in anymore. Dean and my mother fought in my grandfather's kitchen. Dean said, "You told me this was clean. In and out, nobody gets hurt." "Nobody got hurt," my mother said. "That money was always going to be ours." "Nora's family, too," Dean said. My mother picked up her coffee. "Nora is a shop girl with a grudge and a certificate." And from the table quietly my father said, "She's our daughter." My mother didn't answer. She changed the subject to the hearing date, my father told me, like the word daughter was something you could reschedule around. The night before the hearing, my father called. Late. Whiskey in his voice or crying or both. "I can't stop her," he said. "I know. If this goes in front of the judge, everything comes out. Danny, all of it. I know that too." A long silence. I could hear him breathing and behind him the particular echo of the old shop office. He was out there again, drinking under the crew photos with his father's name on the window. "He knew, didn't he?" my father said. "About me, about Danny. He knew the whole time and he never said a word and he gave it all to you." "He knew," I said. "And he kept calling you his son for 40 years. He didn't build the dead stop because a machine failed Dad. He built it because he loved you and he couldn't undo what happened, so he made sure it could never happen to anybody else's kid. The whole fortune is him forgiving you, over and over, for 40 years in steel." The line was quiet for a long time. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Maybe not. He gave it to you anyway. That's who he was." He hung up without promising anything. No commitment to testify, no commitment to stop her. Just a click and the faint sound of his truck turning over in a gravel lot. I sat on my bed with the brass caliper in my hand and didn't sleep. I went over the notebook pages one more time, not because I needed to, because steel was the only thing I still trusted, and people lately were not. The hearing was on a Tuesday in October. The maples along the Rock River had gone the deep red they only turn after the nights get cold enough to strip a tree of everything it doesn't need. Courtroom 4B. Wood panels, fluorescent light, a flag that needed ironing. Our side, Paula at the table, me beside her, the oak tool chest sitting on it as Exhibit A. Francis Whitaker behind us, silver hair, hands folded. Owen Schmidt with 2 copies of his report. Their side, Gerald Pike, my mother in navy with her jaw set, my father at the far end of the table staring at the grain of the wood. Dean sat in the front row of the gallery, closest to the exit, his foot going like a sewing machine. And in the second row, in a pressed church dress, straight as a fence post, sat Ruth Veasley. She told me she'd be there. Next to her, to my surprise, sat an older man with a neatly pinned right sleeve. I didn't know him. I would in about an hour. Judge Ruiz came in. We stood, we sat. Paula opened with the trust. Francis took the stand and testified for 40 minutes. The trust established 15 years earlier, funded by the patents and the licensing income, irrevocable. Me as sole beneficiary, 3 independent witnesses, a physician's competency letter at execution, and at every amendment. Then she put up the real, recorded assignment from 15 years ago. The patents had left Walter Brandt's name a decade and a half before anyone forged anything. Pike cross-examined her about her trustee fee and sat down when she said the word fiduciary twice. Then Paula called Owen Schmidt and his spreadsheets filled the screen. 28 months, $340,000. The fake annuity fees, the valuation fees, the licensing administration, charges to Dean's P.O. box. The structuring, dollar by dollar under $10,000. Fake vendors that matched no business registered in Illinois, with invoice metadata pointing at my mother's own laptop. Then the forged assignment. Dr. Pruitt's video deposition played on the courtroom monitor, clinical and devastating. The questioned signature inconsistent with the genuine exemplars, the tremor present in every real late sample and entirely absent from the forgery, her opinion that Walter Brandt did not sign it. Then Paula read Kurt Lang's sworn statement aloud. "Mr. Holt asked me to notarize the document. Mr. Brandt was not present. I was told he had signed it earlier. I did not verify." Dean's face went the color of wet concrete. Judge Ruiz took off her glasses. "Counselor," she said to Pike, "does your client wish to respond to the accounting and the assignment? We need additional time to review the forensic." You've had since August. Then Paula said, Your Honor, there's one more matter, and it goes to the heart of what the petitioner has actually done. May I approach with the notebook? She laid it out page by page, the way I'd taught her to read it. The auto-reset mechanism. The sketches, the spring math in Walter Brandt's shaking hand. The dates, 14 months before the petitioner and Mr. Holt filed a federal patent application naming themselves as the inventors of that exact mechanism. And at the bottom of each page, the witness line, read and understood with a date. Signed, Ruth Veasley. We're not only here about money, Your Honor, Paula said. The petitioner and Mr. Holt filed a sworn application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office claiming to have invented this device. This notebook, witnessed contemporaneously, establishes that Walter Brandt invented it more than a year before their filing. We've moved to correct inventorship, and we'd ask the court to note that the sworn declarations in that application appear to be false. Paula called Ruth Veasley to the stand. Ruth put on her bifocals, looked at the page the clerk handed her, and said, in the voice of a woman who'd kept other people's records honest for 41 years, "That's my signature. Walter showed me that drawing in the spring of that year. He was so proud of it his hands shook worse than usual. I read it and I understood it and I signed it, same as I'd done 1,000 times since 1981. He invented that, not that boy." She looked once directly at Dean. Dean looked at the floor. Pike tried to stand. Your Honor, the DNA, the inventorship question is a federal matter. It's a matter of whether your client filed a fraudulent document, Judge Ruiz said. Sit down, counselor. That should have been the end of it. It nearly was. But then Gerald Pike did the thing Paula had warned me he would do. He had nothing left on the merits, so he went for the only thing he had. Your Honor, he said, the petitioner's husband, Glenn Brandt, is Walter Brandt's only son and natural heir. This entire trust, this notebook, all of it, was orchestrated by a granddaughter who isolated a dying man and turned him against his own child. We intend to show a pattern of manipulation, and frankly, Your Honor, the family has long-standing private matters concerning Glenn Brandt's history that bear on his state of mind and his treatment within this family. He was going to do it for them. He was going to drag Danny Cole into the room to paint my father as the broken, wronged son and me as the schemer. My mother was watching me, and there was the smallest curl at the corner of her mouth because she thought the leash was about to do its work in open court, and my father stood up. He wasn't called. Pike hadn't put him on the stand. He just stood up at the end of the table, and the room went still, and he said, "Stop. Don't. I'll say it. I'd rather say it than have him say it for me." "Mr. Brandt," the judge began. "I set that machine up," my father said. He wasn't talking to the judge. He was looking at the older man with the pinned sleeve in the second row. "I took the guard off and I didn't put it back, and I let you run it, Danny, and you lost your hand because I was 17 and stupid and showing off. And my father told the whole world it was the machine so I wouldn't have to carry it. And I let him. For 40 years I let him carry it, and then I let her." He didn't look at my mother. "He couldn't. I let her use it on me to take everything he ever made and put our names on it." The man with the pinned sleeve, Danny Cole, who Ruth had called the night before, I'd learn, because she thought he had a right to be in the room. Danny Cole sat very still. Then he said, not loud, just enough to carry, "I figured it out years ago, Glenn. I've known a long time." A pause. Walt knew I knew. We never said it out loud. We didn't have to. He looked at the notebook on the clerk's table. He spent his whole life making sure no other kid lost a hand. "I made my peace with it a long time before you did." The leash was just a piece of paper on the floor. My mother had nothing left to hold. Pike sat down. He didn't have a choice. I spoke once the whole hearing. I didn't raise my voice. I used the tone I use when I'm reading a finding back to a client who already knows the answer is bad. "My grandfather didn't feel sorry for me," I said. "He chose me. And he didn't choose me over my father. He spent 40 years choosing my father, quietly, in a way my father never even saw. The only person in this family Walter Brandt couldn't save," I said, looking at my mother, "is the one who spent 30 years deciding that love was just leverage she hadn't billed for yet." My mother came up out of her chair. "That girl turned him against his own family. She's a shop girl with a certificate she doesn't deserve." "Sit down, Mrs. Brandt," Judge Ruiz said. "I won't ask twice." She sat. Her hands were shaking. Not like my father's, not from grief or shame, from rage. The particular rage of a person hearing the story they've told themselves for 30 years read back to them by someone who kept the receipts. Judge Ruiz ruled from the bench. The trust was valid, executed during documented competence, properly witnessed, irrevocable. The patents and the royalty stream had been trust property for 15 years and were never part of the estate. The Keystone assignment was void. Forged signature, fraudulent notarization, fiduciary breach. She ordered full restitution of every misappropriated dollar. She found that the auto-reset application contained false statements as to inventorship and directed that her findings be transmitted, along with the notebook evidence, to the Patent Office and to the United States Attorney, in addition to referring the forgery and exploitation to the Winnebago County State's Attorney. Pike didn't appeal. My mother sat motionless while it was read. Dean was already gone. He'd slipped out during Dr. Prout's deposition and never came back. The hallway outside smelled like floor wax and old radiators. I was almost to the doors with the tool chest under my arm when I heard footsteps. Nora, my father, tie loose, eyes red. I signed what she told me to sign, he said, and his voice cracked on signed. Every form, I never read them. I was so scared of being the boy who, he couldn't finish it. I know, Dad. He knew, and he kept me anyway. That's who he was, I said. I didn't hug him. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I didn't walk away either. I stood there, holding the chest my grandfather built, while my father cried in a county courthouse under a bulletin board about jury duty. Behind him, down the hall, Danny Cole was talking quietly with Ruth Veasley, and at one point he laughed at something, and the sound of it carried, and my father flinched and then slowly, almost smiled. That was the closest thing to a beginning I saw that day. The state's attorney moved efficiently. My mother pleaded to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery, 18 months suspended, 3 years probation, full restitution, and a felony on every background check for the rest of her life. Dean pleaded to conspiracy and making false statements. He lost the credential he'd printed licensed professional off of, and the auto-reset application was struck. Kurt Lang lost his notary commission for a decade. My father cooperated, and the state's attorney declined to charge him, passive, under duress, and the first one to tell the truth in open court when it cost him the most. My mother filed for divorce before sentencing. My father moved out of the house on Auburn Street into a one-room place on the west side, and the last I heard he was doing maintenance work at a tool and die shop 2 towns over, where nobody knew the name Brandt and he could just be a man who was good with his hands again. The patents came home to the trust. The royalties resumed. The auto-reset, properly credited to Walter Brandt, was filed clean, by me this time, with his name in the inventor's block where it always belonged. I didn't move into my grandfather's house. I kept the apartment over the hardware store. It was mine before any of this, and it smelled like cut keys, and it was honest. But 6 months after the hearing, I used part of the trust to open the Walter Brandt hand shop, a free training center in the old works off Kishwaukee Street, where kids who aren't going to college learn to run machines safely and build things that last. The first thing every student learns, before they touch a single switch, is how a dead stop works and why it exists and whose worst night it grew out of. The second thing they learn is how to keep a notebook, bound, dated, witnessed, because an idea is worth nothing until you can prove it came out of your own head first. I had the shop rewired and repainted, 3 walls fresh. The 4th I left alone, the original board with 60 years of Ruth Veasley filing cabinets worth of scuffs, still carrying the ghost of cutting oil in the grain. Ruth came to the opening and brought a coffee cake and stood in the doorway looking at the first 8 students at their benches. Walter would be proud, she said. He'd say I overspec the ventilation, I said, and she laughed because it was true. Danny Cole comes by on Thursdays. He shows the kids how to set a guard with one hand, which turns out to be the best lesson in the building, because none of them ever forget why he only has the one. My father and I don't talk much. It isn't forgiveness and it isn't punishment. It's distance, the honest kind. Some doors you close gently. My mother and I have a court order. Some doors need a lock. There's a brass caliper on the bench in my office now, 6 inches, worn gold smooth at the thumb wheel. It sits next to the oak tool chest, which sits under a framed page 414 of his notebook, the auto-reset, the spring math in his shaking hand, and at the bottom, in steady letters, Ruth's signature, and a date. He wrote it in his letter, and I'll say it the way he'd want me to. Anybody can put their name on a thing. The only honest measure of a person is what they keep building when nobody is paying them to. My grandfather built safety into 1,000 machines out of the worst night of his life, and he built a paper trail for me out of the last clear months of his, and he never once asked for credit for either. I didn't inherit $20 million. I inherited a record, and a standard, and a habit of measuring twice. That's worth more, and it's the one thing they could never forge. That's my story. One oak chest, one stubborn notebook, and a grandfather who built things that outlasted the people who tried to steal them. If this reminded you to check who actually controls the patents, the property, or the power of attorney for someone you love, go check this week. Don't wait for the padlock. And if you know someone who needs to hear that the truth is the one thing a liar can't outtalk, share this with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.